Part 21 of Works of Sallust. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Works of Gaius Sallustius Crispus. Translated by Alfred W. Pollard. Jugurthine War, Part 12. Meanwhile, Marius, after settling his army in huts for the winter, marched with the light cohorts and a part of the cavalry to the desert country to besiege one of the royal forts, in which Jugurtha had placed the whole of his deserters as a garrison. Bocchus now once more, either from considering what had been the issue to him of the two battles, or by the advice of other friends whom Jugurtha had left unbribed, chose from among his intimates 5 of proved loyalty and great ability, and bade these proceed as ambassadors to Marius, and subsequently, if advisable, to Rome, giving them full power of treating and of concluding the war in any way they could. The ambassadors set out betimes for the Roman winter quarters, but on their way were beset and plundered by Gaetulian brigands, and escaped trembling and in sorry plight to Sulla, whom the consul, on setting out for his expedition, had left in command as propraetor. Sulla received them not, as their condition warranted, as impostors and enemies, but with an elaborate and unstinted courtesy, which made the barbarians believe that the reputation of the Romans for avarice was undeserved, and that Sulla, since he showed them such generosity, was their friend. Even as late as this, many still understood nothing about bribery, and thought that no one was generous except out of a corresponding goodwill, and regarded all gifts as tokens of kindness. The ambassadors explained to the quaestor the instructions they had received from Bocchus, and at the same time begged of him his patronage and advice, magnified the king's resources, loyalty, and greatness, and touched on other points which they thought likely to be of use or to conciliate. Sulla promised them everything, and instructed by them how to address both Marius and the Senate. They remained where they were for about 40 days. On returning to Cirta unsuccessfully from his enterprise, Marius was informed of the arrival of the ambassadors, and ordered them to accompany Sulla to Utica. He also summoned Lucius Baelinius, a praetor, and all persons in the country of senatorial rank, and in the presence of these received the message of Bocchus. The consul granted the ambassadors leave to proceed to Rome. Meanwhile they asked for a truce. This Sulla and the majority of the council were in favor of granting. A few voted for a more arrogant course, ignorant, we may presume, of human fortunes, which in their unstable and fluctuating nature are ever shifting to opposite poles. After obtaining all their requests, 3 of the Mauritanians set out for Rome with Gnaeus Octavius Russo, who, as quaestor, had brought pay money to Africa. The other 2 returned to the king. From these Bocchus heard with pleasure all their news, and especially of the kindness and zeal of Sulla in his service. At Rome his ambassadors, after owning that the king had erred and been led astray by the wickedness of Jugurtha, entreated for an alliance of friendship, and received as answer that the Senate and people of Rome are wont to remember services both good and ill. To Bocchus, insomuch as he repents, they accord pardon for his fault. An alliance of friendship will be granted when he has deserved it. Immediately on learning this answer, Bocchus besought Marius by letter to send Sulla to him, that under his guidance measures may be taken to settle the points at issue. Sulla was now dispatched with an escort of cavalry, foot soldiers, and Balearic slingers, and with these there went a force of bowmen and a cohort of Pelaginians, who for the sake of expedition wore the armour of skirmishers, by which they were as well protected as by any other kind against the light weapons of their enemies. When they had now been 5 days on the march, Volux, the son of Bocchus, suddenly appeared on the open plain, and not with more than 1,000 horsemen. But these, by their confused and disorderly advance, seemed both to Sulla and everybody else more numerous than they really were, and inspired a fear of hostilities. Each man, therefore, held himself in readiness, tested his armour, and prepared his weapons for use. Some little fear was felt, but hope prevailed, as was natural with conquerors when confronted with an enemy they had often defeated. Meanwhile the horsemen who had been sent to the front to reconnoitre reported, and truly, that the encounter was a peaceful one. Volux approached, and addressing the quaestor, informed him that he had been sent by his father Bocchus at once to meet and escort him. During this and the following day the two forces mingled fearlessly together. But later on, when the camp had been pitched, and it was now evening, the Mauritanian suddenly hastened to Sulla with an agitated and frightened countenance, and announcing that he was informed by the scouts that Jugurtha was not far distant, prayed and entreated him to escape secretly with himself under cover of night. Sulla haughtily replied that he had no fear of the oft-defeated Numidian, and had full confidence in his men's courage. Even, he added, were certain destruction imminent, he would rather stand his ground than betray his soldiers and disgrace himself by flight in order to prolong the uncertainty of a life which soon, perchance, disease might terminate. Advised, however, by Volux to set out by night, he approved the plan, and immediately ordered that when the soldiers should have finished their suppers in camp, a number of fires be lighted, and the departure effected in silence in the course of the first watch. Exactly at sunrise, when all were tired with their night march, and Sulla was measuring out a camp, the Mauritanian cavalry reported that Jugurtha was encamped in advance of them at a distance of about 2 miles. The news became known, and now indeed our men were seized with terror, believing themselves betrayed by Volux and beset by an ambush, nor were there wanting some who demanded that he should be summarily punished, and that so great a crime on his part should not be left unavenged. Sulla, however, although he took the same view of the case, defended the Mauritanian from harm. He exhorted his soldiers to keep a brave heart, and told them that a few men of energy had often fought with success against a host, that the less they spared themselves in the battle, the safer they would be, and that no soldier who had armed his hand ought to seek for safety from his unarmed feet. While, in the height of his terror, he exposed the blind and undefended side of his body to the foe. He then, after loudly invoking heaven to witness the crime and treachery of Bocchus, ordered Volux, since he was found plotting against them, to leave the camp. Volux besought him with tears not to hold such a belief. No deceit, he assured him, had been used. The catastrophe had been brought about by the cunning of Jugurtha, whose spies had apparently acquainted him with their route. The king, however, he continued, had no large force at his disposal. He was dependent for all his hopes and resources on his father Bocchus, and he believed would not venture on any open attack in the presence of the latter's own son. The best course, it seemed to him, that they could take was to march openly through the midst of Jugurtha's camp, that he would either send his Mauritanians on front, or leave them where they were, and himself accompany Sulla without an escort. Under such circumstances his proposal was approved, and a start was at once made. Their approach was unexpected. Jugurtha waited and hesitated, and meanwhile they passed him in safety. A few days afterwards they reached their journey's end. On their arrival they found in frequent and familiar intercourse with Bocchus a certain Numidian named Aspar, whom Jugurtha, on hearing of the summons to Sulla, had dispatched as an ambassador and secret spy upon the designs of Bocchus. They found also a certain Dabar, a son of Masugrada, and of the family of Massinissa, but of low birth on his mother's side, she having been his father's concubine, whose many good qualities had made him beloved and esteemed by the Mauritanian. Bocchus had proved this Dabar's loyalty to the Romans on many occasions, and therefore chose him to convey a message to Sulla, announcing that he was ready to do whatever the Roman people wished. He further asked the general himself to fix a day, place, and hour for a conference, and assured him that he had violated no single detail of their agreement, and that he need have no fear of Jugurtha's ambassador, who had been received solely to enable them to conduct their business with greater freedom, for this was the only way by which they could guard against the king's subtle attacks. I gather, however, that Bocchus was actuated rather by considerations of Punic honour than by these which he professed, and was at the same time amusing both the Romans and the Numidians with the hopes of peace. He deliberated often and deeply whether he should deliver Jugurtha to the Romans, or Sulla to him, and while his inclination was hostile, his fears pleaded our cause. Sulla replied to his message that he would speak briefly with him in the presence of Aspar, and hold the rest of their discussions in private, or with as few witnesses as possible. At the same time he instructed him what answer to return. The meeting took place in the way he wished, and Sulla announced that he had come on a mission from the consul to ask whether Bocchus intended to maintain peace or war. On this the king, according to his instructions, bade him return after 10 days. He had not even yet come to any resolution, but would give him an answer on the day named. They then separated, and returned each to his own camp. When the night was far advanced, Sulla was secretly summoned by Bocchus. Only trusted interpreters were admitted by either party, and besides these, Dabar, a man of high character and liked by both parties, as a go-between. The king immediately began the following speech. I have never thought that it could happen that I, the greatest king in this land, and of all princes of whom I know, should owe gratitude to any private person. Indeed, Sulla, I profess that before I knew you, though I helped many at their prayer and others of my own accord, I myself needed the assistance of none. At the breach of such a custom, others are wont to grieve. To me, it is a pleasure. I am content that it may be my lot to have needed for a moment this friendship of yours, than which my heart holds nothing dearer. In this profession it is open to you to test. Take and use my arms, men, money, whatever in fact you will, and never while you live think that my debt of gratitude to you is discharged. It will ever remain with me undiminished, and, in a word, you shall never, to my knowledge, wish for anything in vain. To my thinking, it is less dishonourable for a king to be surpassed in arms than in generosity. As for your commonwealth, as a guardian of whose interest you have been sent hither, listen to the few words I have to say. I neither made war upon the Roman people, nor did I ever wish it to be made. I only used arms to protect my territory against an armed invader. This question, however, since you wish it, I pass over. As for your war with Jugurtha, carry it on as long as you please. I, for my part, will not cross the river Mulucca, the ancient boundary of my kingdom and that of Micipsa, nor will I allow Jugurtha to come on this side of it. Furthermore, if you make any request which you can worthily prefer, and I accord, you shall not leave my presence unsatisfied. To this speech Sulla replied briefly and moderately as touching himself, but spoke at length on the subject of the peace and their common interests. As the upshot, he made it clear to the king that the Senate and people of Rome, insomuch as they had proved their superiority in arms, would not regard his promises as any favour, that he must do something which they might see had been to their advantage rather than his own, and that this was perfectly easy for him since he had Jugurtha in his power. Let him deliver Jugurtha to the Romans, and their debt would be great. Their friendship and alliance, and the part of Numidia which he was at present trying to obtain, would all come to him as a matter of course. The king at first gave a firm denial, alleging that the bonds of kinship and marriage, besides a solemn treaty, prevented his compliance. He had fears too, he said, lest if he should act treacherously, he might alienate the affection of his people, who loved Jugurtha and hated the Romans. At last, after many importunities, he gave way, and promised to do everything as Sulla desired. They made such arrangements as seemed expedient for counterfeiting the peace, for which the Numidian, in his weariness of war, was most desirous, and then, after concerting their plot, departed their several ways. On the next day Bocchus summoned Aspar, Jugurtha's ambassador, and informed him that through Dabar he had learnt from Sulla that the war could be brought to an end on certain conditions, and that he therefore wished him to ascertain the views of the king. Aspar was overjoyed, and set out for the camp of Jugurtha. When he had been duly instructed on all points by that king, after 8 days he returned in haste to Bocchus, and informed him that Jugurtha was anxious to comply with every demand, but had little faith in Marius, as he had often made previously fruitless treaties of peace with Roman generals. If Bocchus wished to act in the interest of both, and gain a secure peace, he could contrive a meeting of all the parties, as if for a conference on the question of peace, and should then betray Sulla to himself. When he had a man of such importance as prisoner, a treaty would soon be concluded at the bidding of the Senate or people of Rome. A man of noble birth would not be left in the hands of enemies, into whose power he had fallen, by no cowardice of his own, but in the service of the state. The Mauritanian long deliberated on this proposal, and at length proposed to carry it out. Whether in this case his hesitation was real or assumed, my information does not say. The caprices of kings are as unstable as they are strong, and often clash with each other. Later on, the time and place for the assembly of the conference on the subject of peace was settled, and Bocchus addressed himself now to Sulla, now to the envoy of Jugurtha, treating each with courtesy, and made them both the same promise. They, on their side, were equally delighted and full of hope. On the night which preceded the day appointed for the conference, the Mauritanian is said to have first summoned his friends, and then, suddenly changing his mind, to have bidden them withdraw, and to have long debated the problem with himself, while his countenance and glance changed with each turn of his thought, and despite his silence laid bare the secrets of his breast. When he at last ordered Sulla to be summoned, and planned the treachery against the Numidian according to his wish, at last day came, and it was announced to him that Jugurtha was not far off. Accompanied by a few friends and by our quaestor, as if to pay the king the compliment of meeting him on his way, he advanced to a hillock within an easy view of the men in ambush. The Numidian, with most of his intimates, approached the same place, according to the agreement, unarmed. The signal was immediately given, and he was attacked by the ambush upon either side. His companions were all cut down, and Jugurtha himself was delivered in bonds to Sulla, and by him conducted to Marius. During this same period, the Roman generals Quintus Caepio and Gaius Manlius were defeated in a battle against the Gauls, and all Italy trembled in the panic thus occasioned. From that day down to our own times the Romans have believed that, while their courage can surmount all else with ease, with the Gauls their contest is for preservation, not for fame. In the present crisis, when it was announced that the war in Numidia was ended, and that Jugurtha was being brought in chains to Rome, Marius was elected consul in his absence, and Gaul decreed to him as his province. On the 1st of January, the general, who had won such renown and was now consul for the second time, celebrated his triumph. At that crisis, the hopes and the resources of the state were alike centered in him. End of Jugurthine War, and end of works of Gaius Sallustius Crispus, translated by Alfred W. Pollard.